This is your first time on the show. Excited to talk to you. And we're talking about this book. I'll burn that bridge when I get to it. Do you want to just kind of start us off talking about a little bit about what led you to write it?
Most of my writing has been on other subjects, the Israel-Palestine conflict, aspects of the Nazi Holocaust. And I wrote a book on Gandhi. I would say the main impetus was in the last few years, beginning in 2016. I was involved with the Bernie Sanders candidacy. Um, and then I was probably the only one over 30 who was attending the George Floyd demonstrations. Uh, Not because I'm some sort of saint, simply because you might recall that the George Floyd demonstrations unfolded during the height of the COVID epidemic.
Mm-hmm.
And people in my age cohort, really anyone over 30, didn't want to be in crowds. Um, I didn't want to miss the opportunity to participate in something which seemed politically significant. So I ventured into the demonstrations. And between the Bernie Sanders candidacy and the George Floyd demonstrations, it was hard not to notice that something significant, unprecedented in my lifetime, was happening. The Bernie Sanders candidacy was the first class struggle mass movement since probably the 1930s, which is to say, a candidate was grounding his campaign in very specific, clear, lucid class issues, and very explicitly targeting the what came to be called after the Occupy movement, targeting the 1%.
Mm-hmm.
He managed to cobble together a platform of not an excessive number of planks, four or five focus planks: Medicare for all, abolish student debt, abolish college tuition, Green New Deal, jobs program, and investment in public infrastructure. That was the essence of his campaign. And in the course of that campaign, he targeted in explicit terms the 1%, naming them, naming Big Pharma, naming Goldman Sachs, calling Wall Street, Big Pharma, a gang of crooks, a bunch of crooks, as he liked to say. That was something new for, at any rate, my generation. And you might say of Bernie Sanders, he had an old left politics,
Mm.
kept to those old left politics, and then finally reality caught up with him. That platform that he had been articulating since the 1970s, it wasn't all that relevant to a society that was, relatively speaking, in the post World War II era, relatively prosperous, aside from what came to be called, after the book by Michael Harrington, the other America. The other America was basically Appalachian whites, blacks who were not participating uh, in significant numbers in the great post World War II boom.
Mm-hmm.
So Bernie's politics were not altogether relevant to the moment. But beginning in the early 1980s, during the Reagan period, a long stagnation set in wages for American workers, from which they never recovered. It was a downward curve from the early 1980s. That coincided with the hollowing out of the union movement or unionization. And so workers were more exposed than ever to the insatiable greed of the haves. that also coincided with this vast chasm that opened up between that 1% and 99% in terms of distribution of wealth. So, as I said, reality caught up with Bernie. The political platform he had articulated in an era in which it wasn't really relevant now became relevant. So, for myself, who basically was schooled in the old left Marxist Communist Party politics, it was a exhilarating moment, and an exhilarating moment. It filled you with hope. And then along came the George Floyd demonstrations, and those two were very striking to me because large numbers of whites were participating. At the beginning, you could say the first couple of weeks, it was about 50% black, 50% white. By the third week, it was probably around 75% white, 25% black. A certain disillusionment set in among blacks because it didn't look like this was going anywhere. And in fact, that intuition proved to be correct. It didn't go anywhere. It just kind of exploded in this demolishing uh, of statues and things like that.
Mhm.
Um, but what struck me about these demonstrations was in my day, whites participated.
Mhm.
However, let's say in the civil rights movement, however, it was mostly privileged whites, and it always had a taint, and maybe more than a taint, of noblesse oblige or radical chic. We're doing them a favor, an
Mhm.
act of charity. That was not at all the tenor of the George Floyd demonstrations. These were white working class kids, mostly 30 and below. As I say, I was the one exception, mostly 30 and below, who, number one, economically were just one notch ahead of the blacks. They also have no future in the system. The system has completely failed them in the present, and as far as one can see, is going to fail them into or unto eternity.
Mhm.
Number two, because there has been a relative, I emphasize relative, homogeneity of the 80%, especially the under 30 generation, a lot of them live with each other. You know, if you come to New York City, I don't know where you're speaking from, it's basically four young people to an apartment. Each of them are roughly paying $1,000 rent. And you'll have in one apartment a black person, a white person, a gay person, a lesbian person. There's been this kind of racial, sexual homogenization, basically, because everybody's looking for a place. Everybody needs to have the four roommates to make the month's rent. And so beggars can't be choosers. You choose wherever you can get. And if you're three people and you need a fourth, you take whoever you can get. But that meant there was now a much greater, what you could call, naturalness of relations between people of different racial backgrounds and sexual orientations. You didn't feel that noblesse oblige anymore. You didn't feel that radical chic anymore. It's as if to say, we're all in this together. So there was, yes, it's true, the stimulating stimulus was the George Floyd
Mhm.
outrage. But that wasn't the end of the story. It was a comprehensive outrage at the system that had destroyed everybody's lives. The police, as always, were the symbol of the armed force of the system. And it was very striking to me the anger, the sheer unadulterated anger of the white protesters as they shouted at the police.
Mm-hmm.
They were so angry. And it wasn't the racism, it was the anger at their own lives. The fact that they, meaning the white protesters, had no future in this system either. And yes, this system is fucking up black people, but to a slightly lesser degree, it's fucking up white people too. So
Sure.
to me, those were very hopeful developments, but that's half the story. The other half of the story was this phenomenon called identity politics, wokeness, which had, so far as I could observe, no connection with the real lives of these real people. I teach these students, I teach at City University, it's a public
Mm-hmm.
university. Does anybody there care about pronouns? I've had about 300 students in the last 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
How many have asked me, raised any issue in emails or after class about pronouns? Two. I can tell you literally two. That's it. These students, they have, so to speak, bigger fish to fry. They have to pay the rent. They're keeping down usually one or two jobs. They have huge family responsibilities, especially during the COVID time. A grandparent got COVID, a father got COVID, They have huge responsibilities. And as Brianna Joy Gray pointed out to me when I did an interview with her, she pointed out that Bernie, she said it with a certain amount of pride, rightfully so. She said Bernie won every demographic under 30. He won every demographic under 30 because those planks of his platform, which incidentally didn't include pronouns, those planks of his platform resonated with the people, either who were in the Bernie campaign or later in the George Floyd demonstrations. And so it was for me quite revealing how removed and remote this identity politics wokeness agenda was from what was basically a class struggle platform. And secondly, it wasn't as if the wokeness, the identity politics was neutral,
Mm-hmm.
indifferent, or in a separate compartment. The identity politics was called out with the explicit task of derailing the Bernie candidacy, alleging, as Ta-Nehisi Coates put it, that Bernie was weak on the reparations question, alleging that Bernie was weak, as Angela Davis put it, on the race question, demanding, as Whoopi Goldberg put it on The View, why aren't you getting out of the race already? She snarled at him. Or Kimberly Miss Intersectionality Crenshaw saying that the real action is not with these old white Jewish schmucks like Bernie. It was the corporations. They were the really cutting edge, woke, uh, woke participants in the current revolution, as the New York Times headline put it by Sydney Ember, this execrable hack. She said, the revolution finally came, but it wasn't the one that Bernie predicted. What was the revolution? It was Amazon and all these corporations honoring Black Lives Matter, honoring gay pride. That was the real revolution. And so the net result, in part wittingly, in part maybe unwittingly, was identity politics, woke politics was weaponized by the Democratic Party to derail, to stop the Bernie class struggle locomotive. And that's what the book is about.
All of the patron exclusive post games on Monday nights, all of the patron exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more. Go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.